Hello Mayo Elementary School 3rd grade. Welcome to your history tour here in the center of Holden. My name is Pastor John Barber and I'm standing here in front of the old Holden Meeting House, the oldest building in the center of town from 1789. Now it's the First Congregational Church of Holden, but it used to be the building where everything happened. Town business, kids went to school, people went to church, all in this one building. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this building, a little bit more about how Holden became a town. I'm really glad we can spend this time together. I'm sorry we can't be in person, but you're going to learn a lot in the next few minutes. So as we kind of move inside, you can see here's the church, right next to the town hall, right here in the center of town. All of this land that the town hall and the church is on was all donated by somebody very famous, and that's John Hancock, who signed the Declaration of Independence. You can see the historical sign on the front from the Holden Historic Society, 1789. That's how old this building is, way underneath it all. Let's go inside. So here we are inside the building, and welcome inside. You're more than welcome here anytime. I'm going to take you upstairs, which is where we usually go, up to the worship space upstairs where the seats are. But I'm also going to take you, because we're doing it by a video, to places where other kids have not been able to go. Way up into the bell tower, up to see the organ pipes, and also way down into the basement where a lot of other 3rd graders haven't got to go. So even though you can't come here personally this year, and in person, you can see things other kids couldn't see. All right, let's go upstairs. So this is the main meeting space, and I'll show you some pictures. It looks different today than it looked when they first built it. This is how the church looks today, and if you were here in person, you would be walking, of course, coming and sitting down in these front pews, and I would be standing up front telling you a little bit about the church. So now that we're inside this old 1700s building, let's go back another 100 years, 150 years or so, and talk about how it all got started. So what do we call this area, this land that we live on? Here's a hint. We call it New England, right? Like the New England Patriots. And why do we call it New England? Well, because the people that came here and founded New England came from Old England. And they came over here to New England because they wanted a lot of new things that they weren't getting in Old England. They wanted especially to get away from the king who ruled everything and told them what to do. They wanted freedom. Freedom is such an important part of New England and the United States. And they wanted to get away from King James. King James controlled everything, including the church. In fact, some of you may even heard of the King James Bible. It's the most popular English version of the Bible even still today. The Puritans and the Pilgrims came to Massachusetts in the 1620s and the 1630s. You may know some of their story from the story of Thanksgiving. And they settled here in this land called Massachusetts, named after the Indians who lived here. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, which at that time was still under the authority of the king, but they had a lot more freedom over here to do what they wanted and to worship as they wanted. The Pilgrims came and landed at Plymouth Rock. Maybe some of you have seen Plymouth Rock in 1620. And the Puritans came in 1636. They were both very religious people, and they founded this great city on the coast of Massachusetts called Boston. And it was to be a city on a hill, which is a phrase from the Bible. It was to be the model city of showing how people could live and do good together. And it kind of worked out and it kind of didn't work out, but that's all part of history. Eventually it got crowded along the coastline and people moved inland. And that yellow space in the middle is Worcester County, where we live, and that purple dot is roughly where Holden is. Now Holden, way back in the early 1700s, was actually Worcester. So if you lived here in the early 1700s, you wouldn't say you were from Holden, you'd say you were from North Worcester. Well, Holden wanted to become its own town, and to name it after a businessman called Samuel Holden. So in order to become a town, you had to first establish a meeting house. You had to first establish a church. That was so much a part of being in Massachusetts back in those days that you couldn't become a town if you didn't create a church. In fact, the very first vote in the town of Holden was that the gospel be preached in said town, and the church was formed and the town was formed. Now, Holden dates itself, as you can see on the sign, from 1741, but the first meeting house was erected in 1737. And that meeting house was right here in the center of town. I'll show you in a minute where it was, not in that exact space today. But that person on the horse down there would be sitting at the light coming up from Big Y, and on their right would be the mobile station, and on their left you can see some gravestones would be the graveyard that's still there today. Now everyone has a picture of the old meeting house at their house, don't they? You know where? On your trash can. Right in the center of the town seal is the old meeting house, and that was the first church. You can see in this picture where the first meeting house was. It was across the street from where the current meeting house or the church is now. So here's an image as if you were looking down from a drone on the center of town. And you can see the old meeting house down in the corner, and where the new meeting house and the church and town hall are now. So in 1789, as I mentioned before, famous John Hancock, there's his signature, who signed the Declaration of Independence, gave the land in the center of Holden to the town. And that's where they built the meeting house. They decided, since the old meeting house was in pretty bad repair, they built a brand new one in 1789, and that is the core of the building that is the church now. They tore down the old meeting house. And this is pretty much what the meeting house would have looked like. I photoshopped out all of the other parts. You can see it was just a square 2-story building. Probably looks something like this. And inside, they had meeting space on the first floor and a balcony on the second floor. This is how many of these old meeting houses were constructed. And while this is not a picture of the Holden meeting house, this is probably very similar to what it looked like back then. And it was like this for its first 40 years or so, from 1789 to 1828. In 1828, they made some big changes to the old meeting house. You can see where it's located right on Main Street, and changes were starting to take place in the town and in Massachusetts and in the United States. So they needed to make some renovations. So they picked up the existing meeting house from 1789, and they moved it back onto the town common, and they turned it around to its current location. Now that was quite the feat back in 1828. They didn't have steam shovels or modern hydraulic equipment and all of this stuff. They had to do it with horses and manpower, and I don't know how they did it, but it's an incredible feat. And that's where the meeting house stands today. Now, they were beginning to separate the town business from the church business. This was something that was going on in the United States. And so they made the meeting house look a little more like a church. And they put this front end on the church. You can sort of see the old square meeting house, but they put this front with a tower and a dome to make it look a little more churchy. And the church looked pretty much like this from 1828 to the 1950s. So the meeting house and the church has looked like this more than any other look in its entire history. Here's a sketch from the 1830s of the center of town, and you can see the Congregational Church with the dome, and on the other end you can see the Baptist Church with the steeple and the yellow Starboard building, and where the town hall is, there's a bunch of what looks like garages, but they're carriage houses where people would park their horse and buggy when they came to the center of town. In 1836, they built the town hall right next to the old meeting house, which was now the church, because they were beginning to separate church and state, church and town. In the early days of Massachusetts and the United States, religion and the state, politics, they were all one and the same. And ministers and pastors like myself would have been on the town payroll, just like school teachers were. but they began to separate the two because they thought that would be better. And so the church was now on its own and was no longer funded by the state and had to raise its own money. And the town built its own town hall where they could have their town offices and do their town business. And I think you're going to get a tour of the town hall after this. Here's a nice picture of what the center of Holden looked like in the 1890s. You can see the church and the town hall and the starboard building. Notice on the very highest point of the church is a dome, not the steeple that you see there today. But that dome was on top of the church from 1828 to 1938, and it has been what has been on top of the church for most of the church's history. In 1938, a hurricane came and really damaged the dome. It didn't blow it off, but it damaged it so bad that after the hurricane was over, they had to take it down. And the top of the church stayed just like that, flat, for about another 20 years, until in 1957, they added on the steeple. And the steeple is made of metal, and it has steel girders like you'd use to build a steel skyscraper that hold it really secure, because I think they didn't want the wind to ever get the better of the top of the church again. And on top of that old steeple there today, see what's way on the top? Is the cross. And the cross is really big. It looks small when you're up there, but it's really big. We took it down to fix it several years ago. Here it is inside in front of the church. Look at how big that cross is. It's taller than a person. And we put gold on it to fix it up and make it look better. It's gold plated. It's really pretty and it shines in the sun. And here's a guy putting it back up. I don't know if any of you are afraid of heights, but that guy there strapped himself to the cross, and they had a big crane, and then they lifted him way up above the steeple, and they put the cross back in after we fixed it about 15 years ago or so. Underneath the cross and underneath the steeple, in that box that's holding it up, is the oldest form of mass communication in Holden and the newest form. Do you know what I'm talking about? Inside there is the bell. This is an old bell that was put in when they first built that tower in 1828. Unfortunately, it cracked, and then they put a new one in 1874. That's still a long time ago, almost 150 years ago. The mechanism that swings it back and forth broke a few years ago, but we just got it fixed. It's been repaired. When you pull that bell, and that bell sounded, it was the oldest way to get everyone's attention in town. There were no radio stations, no TV, no cell phones, no regular landline phones, no way to communicate with people. The bell was the way to communicate. If the bell rang in the middle of the day, you knew you had to send someone to the center of town because there was important information, maybe something about the Revolutionary War or the Civil War or something else was going on. Maybe there was a child lost out in the field and they needed to get people together to go find them. Who knows? But when you needed to get people's attention, you rang the bell and people knew it was time to come to the old meeting house. Now, I told you before that also in there is the newest form of communication, because surrounding the bell are cell towers. That's right. There's cell towers hidden up there in that tower. It works out great for these companies and great for the church because they pay rent to be there. And Sprint and T-Mobile and Verizon are all there. We're going to go upstairs now and see the bell. So here's the rope to the bell. And if you were here in person, you could pull this rope and ring the bell. And see, the rope goes way up there. I'll climb up there and show you. And if you're ever here in town and you want to come by and ring the bell, you can do that. Just stop by and let me know. So there's where we were down there. And here's the rope for the bell. It still goes way up high. There's cell tower equipment up here. This is where you get your cell service for T-Mobile and Sprint and Verizon here in Holden. But I can go way up here, and I'm not gonna. Way up through that trap door is where the bell is. You see the rope goes way up there too. Now I'm gonna pull it hear it. This bell is so heavy that most third graders, if you hold on to this, it'll lift you way up off the floor. So coming back down now into the main meeting space, this is what it looks like now, with the plain white walls and the clear fogged windows and the red carpet and pews. But it didn't always look like this in here. Let me show you a little bit about the changes over the years. Here's the picture I showed you before of an old New England meeting house inside. This is not the Holden meeting house, but this is what it probably looked like for almost its first 100 years, with the meeting space on the first floor where we came in the front door, and the second floor that you just saw, where we meet now, was a balcony. Here's the oldest picture we have inside the old church from 1873 at Reverend Payne's 40th anniversary address. But in 1874, they did some major renovations to the church, and they put a floor in. So downstairs could be classroom and meeting space, and the upstairs would be the worship space. And they took out the ceiling and raised it up to the rafters, and that's how it is today. Here's a picture of what the inside of the church looked like from the 1890s, just shortly after that renovation. And one of the things they added that they didn't have before was the organ. The organ was installed in 1889. In the early days of the meeting house, they didn't like to have instruments. They just liked people to sing without any accompaniment. But they installed the old organ, and I'm going to show you that and take you up to see the pipes in a minute. But this is what it looked like. Very pretty. And see those beautiful lights hanging? Those weren't electric lights. Those were oil lamps, and very pretty. They were replaced later by electric lights. But this is what it looked like, probably for the next 50 years after that. Here's a picture of the church from the 1950s. They put in the center aisle so they could have weddings and special events here. You can still see the organ pipes. They made things dark by painting the beams dark, and they put in dark pews. Notice here the windows are different than they are now. They had picture windows, the stained glass windows, some of them really pretty, some of them just colored glass. And in the 1960s, they took them all out, and they replaced them with just the clear fogged windows they have now. But the nicest ones they kept and they put around the church, and I'll show you that in a minute. They also took out the checkerboard floor, and they replaced the pews with a lighter color and renovated again in the early 1960s. So here's a picture of the church full of people from the 1950s. And here's a picture of the church full of people from today, probably from an Easter Sunday from a few years back. So this old meeting house from 1789 has had tons of people filling it for meetings, and mostly for church and worship, but for other meetings as well over its long history. Here are two of the pretty stained glass windows they took out of the sanctuary, and they put them here. See the old meeting house? So there's the one they liked the most, and they put it up front. And this is where the other two windows went, downstairs in our little chapel. And this little chapel is a nice little space for when we have small gatherings, and you can come in here anytime you want just to pray by yourself. And sometimes people do. Just come in when they want a quiet place just to sit and talk to God. Now let's go back upstairs to the sanctuary and let me show you the organ. I showed you an old picture of the organ when it was installed in 1889. Here it is as it looks today with a new console. And you press one of these keys. Whoops, I guess you gotta pull these out. When I press this button, it opens a valve up top, and there's a big fan in the basement that blows air through it. These pedals, you press with your feet. They make bass noise. But they're all up there behind that stained glass window, and let me take you up there so you can see. So in this room is where all the pipes are. See the pipes? There's some little ones and there's some big ones. And when you press one of those keys, it opens up a valve and lets the wind through and it makes sound. You don't want to be up here when it's playing because it would be really loud and hurt your ears. But you can kind of see, we're up here, you can kind of see the space out there. This is pretty cool. And there's several hundred, maybe a couple thousand pipes up here that make all different kinds of sounds. And some of these pipes are really, really old. In fact, when we did some research, we think some of them are some of the oldest pipes still making noise in central Massachusetts. But this was an old way that people used to make music. Before you had electronics and sound systems, you used wind, and people would actually pedal to make the air before they had electricity. Pretty cool. And this, by the way, is something you guys get to see that other classes haven't gotten to see because we haven't been able to go up here. But because of video, we can do it. All right, so here's a place where other kids haven't been able to go. We're gonna go way down into the basement. This is old. See this big fan here? This is the fan that makes all the air for the organ. And when we click buttons, it blows that air through those pipes to make all that good music. This is the old section of the basement. These walls are old. You'll see a lot of stuff down here. Where's the light? A lot of stuff. The Boy Scouts keep stuff down here. Our nursery school does. But this is the old foundation of the church. This goes way back to the 1700s and 1800s. Pretty cool, huh? Kind of scary. You can see the old foundation down here, lots of stuff. All right, let's go back upstairs. So most people come in through the back door here off the back porch, but if you come into the building like this and you look down this way, this addition down here is newer, built in the 1950s, still old to you, but pretty new to this building. And then this space behind me, where we are, is the oldest place. This is the foundation of this part, and the walls way underneath everything are from the 1700s. They're that old. So you can see from out behind the church here now, the steeple and the old building, and then the parish house wing on it. Some of you may have gone to preschool in the addition there, as there's a lot of kids in Holden that go to preschool here. And here's the Holden War Memorial. We just had Memorial Day. And here's the library, and you'll probably be getting a tour of the library later. Another beautiful historic building in Holden. And there's the town hall right next door. As you look towards the side of the building, you can see the old meeting house, and then you can see an addition that was put on in the 1950s. And I usually bring the students over here to see these steps, and you can see what year this addition was built. 1954. That's a lot newer than 1789 for the original meeting house building. But there's something really cool underneath this 1954, and you know what that is? It's a time capsule. And you know what a time capsule is? A time capsule is when you put items in a vault, some kind of sealed up box that were from like 1954. Maybe they put in drawings or articles or poems people wrote or pictures or cool things like that that people could open at a later date. I've been telling kids forever, I think in 100 years, which would be what, 2054, you kids will be around. Somebody should open it up, see what's in there, maybe put some new stuff in and put it back down. But remember, if you stick around and hold it, that there's a time capsule in the front steps of the parish house at the First Congregational Church. You see the dome on top of the parish house? It's made to be a replica of what used to be where the steeple is. Well, Mayo third graders, I'm so glad we had this time together. I hope you learned some things about Holden and about the first meeting house in the old First Congregational Church. I look forward to hearing any questions, any thoughts you have when I meet with you later this week. And you are also welcome here anytime just to come in and take a look. If I'm around, I can even show you the old bell and maybe you'll get a chance to ring it. Thank you for paying attention and thank you for your time. Have a great day.